Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our global audience. On behalf of Amity University Online, I extend a very warm welcome to all who have joined us for an extremely interesting session today. Since the pandemic, the education sector has transformed significantly, and we have seen a distinctive rise of e-learning. To enable students to adapt to new style of learning and to enable teachers to teach in the new way, the digital transformation of education has become mandatory. Now, this requires a shift in learning design and learning experience design. It also requires adoption of technical interventions such as learning apps and platforms to aid teaching and learning, virtual reality and augmented reality to create an interactive virtual environment, and adaptive learning technologies to personalize content and educational experiences. Now, every educator in their own innovative ways tried to enhance the learning experience of their students during the pandemic. Amity University Online, for example, also brought in the open education policy by allowing students to attend any of the scheduled live classes so that they can acquire knowledge outside their domain, broaden their area of understanding, and increase their employability quotient. Let's now understand how institutes across the world adapted to the new teaching and learning strategy during the pandemic, the challenges they faced, and how they have overcome or plan to overcome these. At this point, I take immense pleasure in introducing our speakers for today, Dr. Clarice Mostert from Northwest University in South Africa, Dr. Rose Mathew from Botho University, and Dr. Maha Bali from American University in Cairo. A very warm welcome to all our panelists. I would now like to invite our first panelist, Dr. Clarice Mostert, to share her experience with the digital transformation of education during the pandemic. Dr. Clarice Mostert is the program leader for business management and a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences at the Northwest University in South Africa. She is passionate about innovative teaching and learning practices and the integration of technology in higher education teaching and learning strategies. Dr. Mostert is also Associate Editor, Tourism Management for South African Journal of Economic and Management Sciences and is the Subject Chair, Business Management for the Social Sciences International Research Conference 2021. Over to you, Dr. Mostert.
Thank you very much, Dr. Monica, for that great introduction. Welcome, colleagues, to this session. In my presentation, I'm going to start at the beginning. Rewind back to, for us in South Africa, March 2020, before we get to where we are in the future, or what do we plan to do for the future. I just, quickly need to close a few documents here on my screen. If I can share, there we go. There we go. Sorry, colleagues, I just quickly need to, sorry, can you just give me one moment, please?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, okay, sorry. So, as we all know, I also just want to switch off my video for the bandwidth. Sorry about that. So as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has really impacted countries socially and economically. And besides the economic sector, which has been hard hit, education at all levels have also been hugely impacted. So social interaction has been restricted because of social distancing, resulting in unprecedented challenges associated with the physical meeting of students and lecturers at higher education institutions across the world. Furthermore, the widespread lockdown of higher education institutions have necessitated immediate and critical response by leadership teams of HEIs to mitigate the impact of the pandemic, to minimize disruption of the academic programs, to save the current academic year, and then to strategize for the following academic year if the current situation does not improve. So that was the things we faced with the onset of the pandemic. So the pandemic has resulted in education and its offerings that have changed forever. And I think that's the excellent thing with regard to that. With the onset to the COVID-19 pandemic, there were over 1.2 billion children out of classrooms, and that excluded higher education institutions globally. With the rise of e-learning at a rapid pace in an attempt to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on education, it was clear that online learning increased retention of information, and ultimately it took less time. But it's also important to note that pre-COVID-19, there was already high growth and adoption in education technology, which may have played a role in how seamlessly higher education institutions could adapt to the changes brought along by the pandemic. So how did the university shift during the pandemic? And I just want to give you a bit of background on the context of the NWU. So we are 3 campuses in 2 different provinces, 3 cities, 2 different provinces in South Africa. We have the Potchefstroom campus, Van der Bijl Park, and the Mahikeng campus. Now, there are 8 faculties across the NWU. And then on screen, you will see the undergraduate degrees enrollment for 2019, but the latest statistics for 2020 indicated that for both undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, there were 58,356 students enrolled. So that's, for our context, quite a large number of students. Now, the NWU primarily provides a contact mode of delivery, which implies face-to-face contact sessions. With the onset of the pandemic and the nationwide lockdown instated by the President of South Africa, the mode of delivery had to shift to what we refer to as emergency remote online teaching and learning. And that was also the case for other HEIs, not only in South Africa, but also on a global level. Now, this resulted in a greater dependence on technology support of the HEI. But the challenge was that given the context of the country and the NWU, not all lecturers and students were necessarily techno-savvy before the pandemic. So this shift from face-to-face to online learning or emergency remote teaching and learning was quite a bit overwhelming for both parties initially. Now, given the fact that technical requirements of using technology for teaching and learning are far greater than traditional in-class teaching for these individuals, the new situation required much more effort and time than was the case with the traditional in-class teaching. Based on the research that we conducted in 2020, although not all lecturers and students were necessarily tech-savvy prior to COVID-19, it was, however, evident that as the semester progressed and they settled into this new normal of emergency remote online teaching and learning, they felt the Northwest University had the necessary resources and that they provided the support needed for both lecturers and students to overcome the challenges brought along by this overwhelming shift. So what we also found was initially they were a bit reluctant with this whole online learning environment and getting used to that. But where we are now having to plan for the future, it's the other way around. They are now hesitant for going back to face-to-face contact sessions because they've now settled into emergency remote online learning and become accustomed to that. And now they need to plan again for what they knew as the normal while adhering to COVID protocols. So this was quite interesting for the Northwest University. Now, if we just talk a bit about the challenges, I think what is important is that although there are certain challenges with online learning, it is important to acknowledge that there are several challenges associated with many of the alternative delivery modes in higher education teaching and learning. So it's not to say that because it's online learning, there are challenges. Yes, there are a range of challenges relating to online learning, but it's prudent of most HEIs to provide a combination of alternative measures in order to accommodate as many students as possible within the online learning environment. Some of the main challenges identified in the shift to online learning included that students relied on support from their parents, which proved to be challenging, especially in instances where parents also had to navigate working from home full-time or facing unprecedented financial challenges because of the pandemic. Now, another significant challenge was also the ability of lecturers and students to adapt quickly to the new teaching and learning scenarios, which in South Africa specifically did not only relate to shifting from face-to-face teaching and learning, but even more so facing the lack of electricity and access to a conducive learning environment at home for many of the students. Then access to devices and data were a significant issue for our institution specifically, as many of the students were accommodated on campus where they had access to Wi-Fi and computer labs before COVID-19. But when lockdown started, they had to move back home where they did not always have access to these important resources on which the success of online learning mainly depends. And this also rolled over into the conducive learning atmosphere where students did not either not have a proper place or setup at home where they could focus on online learning and their academic responsibilities, or where devices and data were an issue, or where they had to face a lack of electricity supply. That's another significant issue for South Africa, is a lack of electricity supply by the government, as the country also had to deal with load shedding throughout this time. Now, lastly, the lack of skills in terms of navigating online learning led to a lack of motivation to learn online. And this was something lecturers also had to manage while managing the provision of academic content, the assessments, and then reaching the module outcomes at the same time. Now, having to overcome all these challenges and planning for the future, after 3 full semesters of online learning, all HEIs are now in a position, and I think in developed countries, they have already started going back to campus and employing this hybrid teaching and learning environments and experiences. And this is one of the most significant benefits that emerged through the scenario of emergency remote online teaching and learning, where both academic staff members and students now realize the value of technology and online learning. However, with our institution specifically, it's evident that although there are certain aspects of online learning that they do appreciate and enjoy, they still value the instances and opportunities that provide for face-to-face interaction. And that does not necessarily have to be in person, but it's also a virtual need. Now, as the case globally at this point in time is, and higher education institutions now plan for hybrid teaching and learning experiences, where some elements of both modes of delivery can be incorporated in the teaching and learning offerings to add value to students' teaching and learning experiences. It's important to note that the success of a hybrid teaching and learning experience might be highly dependent on the context of a specific country and the access to, or the lack of access to, certain resources. Now, furthermore, the pandemic and work from home experience have also led to unique workplace skills and scenarios where it's not always imperative for academic staff members to be on campus every day of the week. What is more is that staff members who were reluctant to use or integrate technology in their work environment prior to the pandemic have now not only learned the value that technology can add to their own work environment and teaching and learning approaches, but they have also now mastered some or all of the skills required to effectively integrate the use of technology. What is more is that we are also dealing with the dawn of Learning 4.0, where the digitization of education is paramount in being prepared for the rapid approach of Learning 4.0. Now, Learning 4.0 implies an era of alignment between humans and technology that will enable new possibilities that were only ever dreamt of before. However, the ability to prepare for Learning 4.0 again will differ from country to country and institution to institution based on the contextual challenges that might be experienced, as mentioned before, for developed countries opposed to developing countries. But if there's one thing that all higher education institutions globally have learned from the pandemic, regardless of the context they find themselves in, is that access to learning and the need for learning has increased significantly over the past year and a half. Now, this plays an imperative role in preparing for Learning 4.0, as it entails copious learning solutions tailored to suit each learner's situational need, beyond any age or gender or any other boundaries. I want to conclude my part of this session by just pointing out the 3 main aspects that's so exciting and that will definitely assist higher education institutions with preparing for Learning 4.0. And the first aspect is the Internet of People versus the Internet of Things. Now, this is where humans and their personal devices are not seen simply as end users of applications that might have been the case over the past year and a half, but they become active elements of the internet that take advantage of internet services as reliable primitives to achieve end-to-end connectivity on a global scale. Secondly, the higher education institution's ability to differentiate between providing theoretical content versus providing more practical training will also play a significant role in assisting higher education institutions to provide learning solutions tailored to suit each learner's individual situational needs. There is a significant need to provide graduates with the necessary theoretical knowledge, but also with the developed and mastered skills required for certain jobs. And lastly, the power of virtual reality, as Dr. Monica also mentioned in her introduction, can be utilized in the online learning environment to address the previous issue of students that need more practical training whilst mastering academic and theoretical content. Now, colleagues, it is clear that the future of online learning is extremely exciting. But in order for us to really capitalize on opportunities, it is so important to not only provide the resources needed, but even more so the support to both lecturers and academic staff members or lecturers to truly excel beyond the requirements of the online learning environment. May we continue to explore all the possibilities and to support each other in this truly exciting and valuable journey that will forever change the way we think in terms of education. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mustard. That was very insightful. Our second panelist for the day is Dr. Ivy Rose Mathew, Pro Vice Chancellor of Academics and Quality at Botho University. Botho University is a Pan-African university with campuses in Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Eswatini, also offering distance learning. Dr. Mathew has been instrumental in the development of distance learning campus at the university. Under her leadership, the university transitioned to online and later on to hybrid teaching and learning institution during the COVID pandemic. She is also a member of International Council of Distance Education. Over to you, Dr. Mathew.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Monica, for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. A special good afternoon to my people from my home country, India. Okay, let me try to share my screen while we are getting ready. Great, I hope you can all see my screen, right? Can you please confirm? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here today along with all of you as part of this global conference. Once again, thanks Priya and Monica for giving me this chance, and also Botho University a chance to come and share our experiences during the COVID period. So today I am planning to share with you my insights as well as the perspectives on COVID impact on our education, especially in Southern Africa, and what we might expect going forward. We all know that last 2 years had been really hard for all of us, of course, more than what we anticipated, especially in the education sector. We got heavily affected. So today what I have for you here, I will talk a bit about Botho University. After that, I will share with you the experiences that we had during this COVID period in terms of teaching and learning. How did we handle that in terms of assessments, the challenges that we had faced, and the opportunities that we had come across during the period, and some of my thoughts on how the future of higher education will look like post the COVID era. That is what we are, Botho University. Like it was introduced at the beginning, we offer both campus learning and distance learning. So our physical campuses are there in 4 countries. They are in Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Eswatini, which was formerly known as Swaziland. The institution was established in 1997, and later on we got the university status. We started as an IT training institute. That's what our history was. We also focus a lot on quality, and because of that, we decided to go in the ISO route, which may not be very common for the education institutions. So currently we are ISO 9001:2015 certified. And in terms of the programs that we are offering, we offer from certificate up to master's level. We are in the process of getting our PhD programs registered very soon. So these are some of the experiences that we had during the COVID era. As I think in what happened around the world when COVID started, many of the universities around the world, they were incredibly reactive in moving to a technology-based teaching and learning. In fact, when we heard the COVID case, especially in Southern Africa, during early March 2020, we had also started preparing ourselves for this move. In our case, it wasn't much difficult because we were already in distance learning. While I say distance learning, many of the programs that we offered in distance learning had used primarily an online learning approach. And we had an established virtual learning platform, which was introduced to all the staff and students equally in both campus learning and distance learning pre-COVID period itself. Nevertheless, we started preparations to switch all our operations to online when we heard about the COVID outbreak. Very soon, within 2 weeks' time, by mid-March itself, all our campuses, one after another one, it had to be, due to the lockdown, it had to be closed for the on-campus operations, actually. So by early April, in fact, in every country, strict lockdown measures were imposed, and we had to completely switch to online learning because of the lockdown measures, actually. So what we had done is that we decided to go mostly in the asynchronous mode. And why did we not go for synchronous? And I think my previous speaker talked about the challenges we have in terms of internet and bandwidth in Southern Africa. So that was our main challenge. We realized that it will be difficult for us to go in the synchronous option. So we had decided to do asynchronous option. I can say that largely to semi-synchronous. In some cases, we left it as optional, but primarily we decided to go in the asynchronous. And while the lockdown was there for a short while, actually, in fact, in some of the countries, we had different experiences in different countries where we are operating. Like I said, we are in 4 countries. In some places, the lockdown was lifted very soon, so we could allow the students to come back to the campus. In some countries, it took more time, actually. So wherever we managed to bring the students back, we slowly decided to go in the blended mode. In fact, the university already had an approach of technology-enhanced learning. Like I said, our history, we started as an IT training institute. So long back itself, we had taken the decision to move in the technology route. We had issued laptops to all our staffs. We had issued tablets to all our students. So they were all prepared with a device. In fact, when we had to go to the online/blended learning mode, we already had a virtual learning platform. We had Blackboard, both the Blackboard Learn and mobile. The mobile option of the Blackboard proved to be very useful during this period because it allowed students to download the materials whenever they had intermittent connections to internet. So that proved to be really useful during this period. We had already introduced virtual labs, in fact, for our distance learning students. So at the back of that, when we had to decide, when we had to go to the online learning, we extended that option for our campus learning students who had to go on the online learning mode. So they could continue with some of the practical modules that they had to do. I'm not saying that it was a perfect solution for everything. Of course, we had challenges there, but in many cases, they could continue with their practical sessions. The students already had access to the online library, so they could make use of many of the learning material that was made availed through the e-library. The university was already in the process of moving from a teaching-centered learning today to a student-centered learning pedagogy, actually. So I believe with the COVID, in fact, this wind of change had really accelerated that process. And there was a lot of focus that was put in that. And right now in the institution, in fact, everybody put a lot of effort to continue our teaching and learning in a student-centered manner. How did we ensure that the students are making use of this online learning? There was a wide variety of efforts that were created. In fact, we focused a lot on the interaction opportunities that we can offer to the students. From the side of the university, like I said, we provided minimum guidelines, primarily because we wanted to go in the asynchronous. So many of the things that came as an initiative from some of the lecturers. We could see a lot of innovative efforts that had come from different lecturers during that period. We had made use of the Blackboard discussion forums, and this was one that was prescribed in the minimum guideline. We made sure that at least once in a week, there is a forum posting that comes from every student to ensure that they continually engage with the learning. We had increased the number of formative assessments. In fact, our semester goes for a period of 19 weeks, and they have to submit one assessment at least one in every other week. Another thing that we had done is we had improved on the communication. We brought all the internal stakeholders as well as the external stakeholders on board. Regular communication, regular meetings were done with the student leadership, and communication was sent to students, the students through our Blackboard as well as the portal, student portal. Apart from this, a lot of efforts were put in place to ensure that there's a continuous monitoring that we are doing in terms of attendance and the participation. So we focus that, okay, the students will be submitting their assessments on time. Otherwise, some efforts were put in place to follow up and give them some support. We had also come up with some guidelines to assist the students who were seriously affected with COVID. We had put some mitigation guidelines in place and also came up with some flexibility in terms of submission dates. And mind you, this was done only during the lockdown period. While the lockdown was lifted, when students had access to the campus, this flexibility in terms of submission dates were taken back so that this will not be misused. And I'm sure all of you will agree with me, counseling is something that is very much needed during this period. Everybody, both students and staff, they are undergoing through a lot of psychosocial problems. So we had also strengthened the counseling support for our students. So these were some of the measures we had put in place to ensure that students are adequately supported during that period. Similarly, to ensure the teaching presence, again, the interaction opportunities were created through the content that is shared. The shared content included various forms like recorded video lectures, PowerPoint slides. The links to various reference materials were provided. I had already talked about the discussion forums. While the virtual lab was there, we had challenges with some practical sessions. So some of the lecturers had even taken the effort to record some demo videos of the practical sessions, especially in terms of some installation videos. Those kind of things were shared for the students. Luckily, the complete lockdown was taken back in 1 to 2 months' time, and students had access to the campus before the exams. So we had done some additional sessions for the students so that some accelerated practicals were done so that students can be prepared for the upcoming assessment. So that also helped the students. In terms of the learning activities, we had made sure that there are several group and individual activities were created that facilitated both the collaboration, which is very important, in fact, in the online working world, and some reflections were also made there. Like I said, the direct instruction is few synchronous sessions were introduced. These were optional, and that was done through Google Meet, or some lecturers had even gone to the way to make use of WhatsApp for some of the synchronous sessions. And we had some beautiful experiences where we also got the feedback from the students. In fact, what we learned during this period is that students were more tended to use WhatsApp, make use of WhatsApp. So we thought it's an easy platform for us to continuously engage students while they don't have access to the campus. So that was also made use. We came up with multiple options for contacting the students. We always tracked their progress and took the effort to answer their queries. And someone was always there to listen to their concerns and support them. Frequent announcements were made. Of course, we were continuously assessing their learning and the learning experience. Some of the lecturers had taken the effort to come up with some virtual office hours. Again, like I said, this was not included in the minimum guidelines. So this was optional, but some lecturers had really taken that effort. And we also took the effort to get arrange some feedback sessions so that we get some feedback and we are able to understand the satisfaction of the learning from the side of the students. This was done through various meetings, anonymous feedbacks. In fact, what had come out, many of the students initially, they were really challenged because of the challenges in related to the access, but later on they started enjoying e-learning. Moving on to the various mechanisms that we had done to assess the students during COVID. When we shifted to the online learning, our assessment methodology also got adapted to the online environment and something that can fit for our context. I know that around the world, there are a lot of practices, but sadly in Africa, we had various challenges. So we had to adopt to some of the methodologies that can fit within our context. At our institution, we follow both formative and summative. So formative came in the way of discussion forum participation, quizzes, online test, presentation like that. Summative was mainly through projects, case studies, online portfolios, online examination, presentations. And following the lockdown, when students had access to the campus, we had slowly introduced some of the written examinations and practical examination. So right now, what we are following in the campuses, that's the blended learning, blended learning approach. Sorry. So what are some of the challenges that we had faced during this online period? And I thought some data will help us to understand the internet challenges that we have in various countries, especially I had put out there in the 4 Southern African countries where we are present. As you can see, 47% is the internet penetration rate in Botswana. And majority of our people live in urban centers. Almost 29% of them, they are living in rural areas. It is very similar in Lesotho as well, 47.9%. That's the data as of January 2021. But here you could see a shift there. Majority of the people, they are living in rural areas. So it was actually a challenge for us. When we had to go in online learning, if you go to Google and read a bit about Lesotho, you can see that it's a place of mountains. Okay, so one of the challenges we faced when the schools are closed, students decided to leave the city and they moved to the mountains, and it was very difficult for them to get access to internet, and they were really challenged to continue with the online learning. The third country where we are present, Namibia, the internet penetration is at 51%. There, the population, it's like 50-50. 52.5% of them, they are located in urban centers and the rest of them in rural areas. The fourth country where we are present, a very small country, you can see the population is only 1.13 million there. The penetration is at 47%. However, something that is of interest to notice is that in all these countries, in all these 4 countries, the number of internet users increased over the last 2 years. So we have the hope that while we are now continuing with this blended learning approach, we could get more student participation in the online learning. That's what we are now trying to get into. Meanwhile, we are also now talking to, this has started during the COVID period early last year itself. We had negotiated with various internet service providers in all these respective countries to come up with some kind of support, some discounted data for the students, or even to the level of whitelisting our virtual learning platform, which is the Blackboard. Some of the challenges that we are faced by students, it's not very different from what the previous speaker had said. Really, it had widened the gap. We had picked that while some had more access to device, internet, etc., the others were really challenged of that. I had talked about the examples of students who had to go back to the mountains in Lesotho and they couldn't access the internet. Although they had a device, the university had provided a tablet, but they were seriously affected with the internet challenges. Yes, the challenges with no internet access to a low internet access or low bandwidth, data is very expensive, that still remains. Students were also affected with various social problems during this time. And to some level, the counseling had really address that and really help them. Similarly, our teachers also were challenged during this period. There was and there is a lot of strain on the teachers in terms of all this additional work that they have to do. Since we are now doing blended learning, they have to go to the class. Similarly, they have to share the material online and make sure that the students are continuously engaged. And we had insisted everybody should create a WhatsApp group for any of the class or any of the batch that they're creating. So some of them, really, they will come back and say that managing this WhatsApp group is very difficult. They always get some messages. There is that expectation that they should respond to every message. So they are really challenged. And also, since COVID period, we had increased the number of continuous or formative assessment. We had introduced the mitigation classes, the extended submission deadlines for assessments. So these are all real challenges that the teachers are facing during this period. Apart from this, many of us are now doing the remote working option. So equally, our lecturers, there is no expectation for them to come to the campus always. They come to the campus when they have a class. The rest of the time, they remain at home and they continue to work from home. So they have the challenges related to the internet and bandwidth, especially when it comes to the marking time. I must say that COVID was also a period of a lot of opportunities. As a university, these are some of the opportunities that we had come across. We had seen an increase in terms of virtual mobility or the collaboration. So this was, in fact, really incorporated into our formal curriculum. What we had done is that we took this opportunity to link our students from our various campuses with the students from various countries across the world and who come from different cultural backgrounds. In fact, we managed to have virtual mobility experience during this period with some of the institutions within Africa and outside Africa with the institutions from, I can name some of them. They are the KTH Royal Institute of Technology from Sweden, DHPW from Germany, the University of Michigan. And we are now looking at the option of doing this virtual mobility with Coventry University. So I think in that sense, it opened up a very new opportunity for us, exciting opportunity for us. Virtual internship is another opportunity that we had come across. While it became challenging for us to send all the students for the in-person internship experiences, we had explored the option of virtual internship, and it was opened up for a small group of students. And what had come out, in fact, we now have the feedback of the first group of students who completed this virtual internship experience. And we could see that from there, 32.14% of our interns, they received an employment opportunity after this. And almost all of them, 96.4% of them, agreed that this experience of virtual internship or remote internship has really increased their ability to work remotely. And I think during this period, it was an opportunity for us to talk to various stakeholders around. We could see that the educators, ISPs, regulators, and governments, I should say that in some countries, it was not the same experience everywhere. They have been more proactive and they moved very quickly. And there is more acceptance and support for online learning now. This also gave us an opportunity to access to the educators globally. We could organize a series of webinars, guest lecturing from various parts of the world. And we saw that this is an opportunity for us to get into more global partnerships. Yes, of course, without no cost for travel. COVID had, in fact, really developed more trust in technology-based operations. Right now, we are attending a virtual conference. We had managed to do our graduation in the virtual mode. And of course, now the world is moving towards a blended learning approach. Yes, really the digital adoption accelerated diversity and inclusion. I can say it's partially true in our context. I know that there's a speaker, my friend Maha is coming very soon. She's an expert in that area. Let's hear what she may have to comment on this. But in our case, it was partially true. While we saw that it widened the gap, we could see that it also accelerated the diversity and inclusion. Remote working, something that all of us are enjoying, and many of you are enjoying, I believe so. So I think this is a trend that we see more growth in the future. So how does the future of higher education look like? In fact, from our experience, what we think is that the whole student experience will change after this. We are going to see the education, which is very different in future, that increases the affordability. Of course, it can accelerate the diversity and inclusion. Perhaps the future students whom we are going to admit in our institutions, they may look more for digital content. They want to see blended intensive programs. They wanted to see the technology-based collaboration. They are already experiencing that one, and they are already doing it. Cybersecurity, of course, is a concern that everybody has. So maybe there is more demand for that, and all backed up with online counseling. When we move to a remote learning or the online learning world, of course, it is a responsibility of the institution to introduce more of such. Related to this, it is a responsibility of the university to focus on the employability skills that is required for the future world. Because our future workforce, they need digital skills. They need collaboration skills because they are going to work in a diverse environment. They also need skills like adaptability and flexibility, along with all such generic employability skills that we always talk about. And what happens with the current workforce? There is an opportunity for us as higher education institution to do the reskilling and the upskilling of the current workforce. That needs to be one of the priority for us. So it is, I think, going to be a challenge for the higher education institution in future to build this digital ecosystem that's going to be unique, as well as that can create equity. With that, let me stop and back to you. Thank you very much once again for this opportunity given to us.
Thank you, Dr. Mathew. That was very informative. I would now like to invite our third panelist, Dr. Maha Bali, an Associate Professor of Practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. She is the co-founder of virtuallyconnecting.org, a grassroots movement that challenges academic gatekeeping at conferences, and co-facilitator of Equity Unbound, an equity-focused, open, connected, intercultural learning curriculum. She writes and speaks frequently about social justice, critical pedagogy, and open and online education. Over to you, Dr. Mahabali.
Thank you, Dr. Monica. Thank you, Dr. Priya, for inviting me. And thank you, Dr. Ivy and Dr. Clarice, for sharing your parts. I always like to start my sessions with a couple of things. So first of all, Assalamu alaikum, which works great across different time zones because we're all on different time zones. It's only 1 o'clock over here. I'm sure it's later in the day for some of you. And I want to tell you to stretch if you need to. If you've been sitting on your desk for a long time today already, you may need to do some stretching. And I also want to ask how you're feeling today. I've got the part where everyone is chatting open and I can see people if they write down how they're feeling. So I think during the pandemic, asking people how they feel at the beginning of every meeting and every class session has been really important. People are not really well all the time. So it's important to check in and see how everyone's doing. I'm not seeing anyone typing things in the chat, but please feel free to do that and I'll come back to it later. So I want to explain a little bit more about my context. I work at the American University in Cairo in Egypt. I work at the Center for Learning and Teaching. So my role is to help people improve their teaching. And of course, during the pandemic, that was a big role. And I've also been working in the field of e-learning for a really long time, since 2003. So the context in Egypt is the internet infrastructure varies by location and throughout the day. So it doesn't matter if you live in a privileged neighborhood or not. Obviously, if you don't live in a privileged neighborhood, you're less likely to have good internet. But even in privileged neighborhoods, the internet can be in and out sometimes and can be more problematic at certain times of day. The internet penetration in Egypt is 71%, but the literacy rate is also 71%. So it feels like people who can read and write seem to have access to the internet. That's sort of my rough conclusion about that. In my university, most of the students are relatively privileged and they live with their families. There were a few who lived on campus who then moved back to living with their families. And that, of course, for scholarship students caused problems in terms of internet access, but the institution provided devices and support with internet. AUC as a university has had good technology infrastructure for a long time, and professors use it widely. So professors had familiarity with this kind of thing, much more than other universities. Other universities had to scramble to figure out what to do. They had different faculties using different technologies and trying to figure things out for the first time. And so we were kind of lucky in that regard. And we are a generally oral society. I will tell you a little bit more about what AUC did during the pandemic, but I also want to talk about some paradigm shifts I think that have happened to me. So I've been in e-learning since 2003, so now 18 years, not even 17 years. And this helped me be helpful to my institution during times of COVID, but there were some paradigm shifts. So even though AUC had all of these technologies from before, we still had paradigm shifts. So I want to know if anyone in the audience has had any paradigm shifts during the pandemic. And I'm again going to try to look at the chat and see if anyone, so I'm seeing some people are saying feeling great, feeling okay, feeling amazing, and so on. All right, so have you had any paradigm shifts during the pandemic? Is there something that you used to believe in about online learning or about blended learning or digital education that changed for you during the pandemic? I'm just going to pause and see what people write in the chat. There might be a little bit of a lag. I think that's what's happening here. Okay, I'm just going to go back to speaking. And then I'm just going to say one of the paradigm shifts for me was about the importance of socio-emotional digital literacies. I think both speakers before me talked a little bit about these social issues that were happening because of the distancing and so on. I think what was happening is a lot of people didn't believe that you could express emotion and support each other emotionally online. And so I think this socio-emotional digital literacy are so important because there are ways to support other people online and to express your feelings and to offer support. And you need to have that, you need to believe that it's possible, and then you need to figure out how to make it happen in your own teaching with the technologies that are available to you, with the circumstances of your students, to know when to do it publicly and when to do it privately, one-on-one with students, and when they need the teacher to do it, and when they need each other, and when they actually need a therapist or mental health counseling. And so that was a very important thing about learning how to express care online. A lot of us thought that the best thing to do was to do asynchronous learning to ensure equity so that all students are able to access it. However, we discovered that asynchronous learning, first of all, requires time management and autonomy from the students, who at the time, especially if they're undergraduates, didn't necessarily do a very good job of it, is more difficult to do during the pandemic, and especially for younger students during the trauma of the pandemic, but also takes a lot more thoughtfulness and time from the teacher. If the teacher has to meet the students synchronously for an hour, then that's an hour of their time. But if they have to prepare by recording a lecture and reading discussion forums, this actually ends up taking a lot more of their time and requires much more time management. And of course, those same teachers, their home lives were also disrupted, right? Especially in my culture, where the women are the ones responsible for the children. So you had to manage your children learning at home, and you had to manage your own work, and you had to maybe let go of any support you had at home and not being able to see family and all of that. So there was a lot of pressure on everyone in that sense. The other thing is, even though building community was always possible online, it became more important than ever during the pandemic because of just the trauma of the situation, but also the physical distancing. So we didn't have a social life in person. And so it had to move online. Beforehand, when I was doing my master's online, I had my master's online, but I had my face-to-face life, and I could socialize in person. But during the pandemic, you didn't have that. So community building became even more important. And then also the importance of semi-synchronous third places. So third place is kind of like WhatsApp groups that allow for semi-synchronous communication. If someone doesn't come to the synchronous, they will still be able to see it, but people can come and all talk at the same time. And Ivy, you talked about the importance of things like WhatsApp groups. And this is, again, because there was no place to meet in a hallway or in a cafe. So you needed some place where you could ask small questions. You didn't have to go to a formal online discussion forum on Blackboard to just chat a little bit with some people. And these things have made a huge difference to our students during the pandemic. So a WhatsApp or Slack or something like that. And the other thing is asynchronous learning is great for accessibility in terms of infrastructure and time and flexibility. But the synchronous, which we had discouraged initially, turned out to work better as long as everyone can access it. It has a better socio-emotional impact and a lower cognitive load, not only on the students, but also on the teachers. So I'm taking a look at what some people have said about paradigm shifts. So having to attend meetings and do trainings online was a big paradigm shift, recognizing that this works, right? Someone's saying soft, sober, and flexible e-learning. So a paradigm shift, someone's asking what I meant by paradigm shift. So like a change in what I believe about online learning, you know? Yeah, so some people are saying they never thought they would pursue their degrees online. One paradigm shift someone else has experienced is the use of making use of self-paced learning. Yeah, maybe in the lesson plan or student modules, even synchronous lessons. Yeah. So it seems people have had the experience of both having synchronous and asynchronous. Okay, what else? Using the Zoom application. I don't know what they're asking there. Yeah. Someone's asking if they think online is better than offline, and I don't think that's a question, because I think it depends on a particular course. You know, if you say a course in architecture is really difficult to do online, but there are courses in theories that can be done better online. I think it depends on the circumstances of the learners, depends how well the course is designed. You can design a really bad online course, but you can also design a really bad face-to-face course, and also a very good one either way. And if you have the technologies that can support certain things like virtual reality, sometimes you can get a lot of engineering done, for example. So it really depends on the thing. Like I don't think there's a way to say online learning as a whole is better or worse than face-to-face. I think it really depends on how it's designed and what you do with it. The other thing that I think is really important that we learned during the pandemic is the importance of local learning and professional development. So local as in local and global at the same time. So not just different people from different countries coming to one place, but also cohorts, groups of people from one institution working with groups of people from other institutions. Recognizing that you can do webinars is great, but webinars are usually coming from one perspective and then the people attend and whatever. But if you have local, you actually have groups of people from different places satisfying their local need, but also sharing the things they have in common with others. So in my institution, we did a lot of this kind of thing, working with other American universities outside the US through a consortium called Amity, and also collaborating with other US institutions about particular things that we had in common. So I would be the one managing the AUC cohort, and there would be other people managing the other cohorts, but we'd get together for things that we have in common and we'd share. So there's always the value. You have nothing to lose by doing that. And then the other one is, for me, the importance of equity literacy, of recognizing the inequalities that happen. And some inequalities are very obvious, especially the economic ones, when someone doesn't have access to internet or device, and these have clear solutions. But there are other kinds of inequities that are less obvious, like mental health issues that students may have, like gender inequality. For example, girls who are now learning from home were sometimes required to help out with cleaning and cooking and so on, which things, when they were going to university, they were outside the house and were not asked to do this, whereas men, for example, were often not asked to do that kind of thing. There are all kinds of inequities that have been happening, and some of these have been mentioned. One of the really important things I want to talk about is, I think folks have mentioned, you know, this concept of having students join remotely even when a class is happening face-to-face. They sometimes call this high flex or dual delivery. It has a lot of different, sometimes they call it hybrid. I think one important thing to think about when we're doing this is, first of all, most of us, I'm going to use the Zoom spotlighting function. So we all know that letting technology drive pedagogy is a bad idea because it gives teachers very little agency and it lets the tools predict outcomes, which is not the right order of things. A lot of times we tell people, let the pedagogy drive the technology. This is not bad. It gives the teacher agency, but it pretends that the technology is neutral, and technology isn't neutral. Technology changes things, and it doesn't allow you sometimes to do things. And if you're not aware of this, it's going to be a problem. So what you want to do is do this entangled pedagogy approach, where there's a mutual shaping of purpose, context, values, methods, and technology together. So where you're thinking about what you want to do in terms of pedagogy, but you're very aware of what the technology enables and what the technology restricts you from doing and limits you from doing, so that you offer the best combination of both. It's a complex relationship. So when you're doing something like bringing students in remotely, you need to know what the limitations of this are, so you can modify your pedagogy to make sure that you get the best outcome for your students. And then sometimes you will realize the technology will allow you to do something that you didn't know you could do before, and your pedagogy can be better because of it. So you need to think about both of those things together at the same time. I'm going to now move on and talk to you a little bit about how we did things at AUC. Keeping in mind that, to have successful online teaching in higher education, it's not just about activities that support the teaching. You need to support the community, and the organization as a whole has to reward good teaching. This is one of the things that institutions forget to do. They tell us to help the teachers teach better, but then they don't reward them for teaching well. So as a faculty development center, our role was, first of all, to anticipate and imagine what teachers would need when we had to move online all of a sudden. And then to implement what we could, offering teachers agency where they needed to choose what they could do and what they don't want to do. And then to listen to them when they were learning, to see what gaps there were, to observe and see how comfortable they felt with what we were doing, and to research and get their feedback. And then based on that, we adapt and we do it again. And so, for example, at the beginning, we taught them the basics of using Blackboard as a learning management system and Panopto for recording lectures. But then we realized they needed Zoom sometimes. And so the university eventually bought Zoom. We taught them how to use online discussions, not as a technical, how do you create a forum, but how do you use it pedagogically to help students learn better? And also gave them other alternatives for online interaction, because online discussion is not the only way to interact online with your students. And other than the trainings that we gave to everyone, we took phone calls and we did one-on-one consultations. And then on the other side, on my own practice, care was a very important thing. And through Equity Unbound, we had some conversations and crowdsourcing of how are we going to show care in the process of moving online. And then when the university closed, we offered a lot of documentation for professors on how to adapt their assessments, things that you guys had talked about, for moving online, but we documented them on Google Docs so that we can keep updating it as the situation progressed, And we gave them Zoom-based webinars, which not only taught them the thing we were talking about, but also taught them how to use Zoom by watching us model how to use Zoom well. And we had sessions that were just called Ask Us Anything, because people didn't necessarily know we didn't know what everyone wanted for sure. So it gave us an opportunity to answer questions that we had not anticipated. And we did a morning coffee session for just people who wanted to come in and talk and just vent, because people needed that as well. And we continued with that kind of thing. For us, it was really important to show care for the teachers so that they could care for the students. It's not enough for the institution to keep telling the faculty that they have to be careful and understanding for students if the institution itself is not being careful and flexible. I mean, as Ivy was saying, it was a lot of work for teachers to have to do this, and the institution had to provide the support, yes, technically how to do it, but also emotionally supporting them. And I think as a faculty developer, I think my work was to do a lot of modeling for professors, get their feedback and get the students' feedback. And in the summer of last year and the year before, we offered a course that they could learn from asynchronously about how to develop a full course online, because we weren't in emergency as much as in March, right? And we also gave them workshops using something called liberating structures and an institute via Zoom, and we taught them how to use things like breakout rooms and Blackboard even better. Now, I'm out of time, so I just want to mention the importance of something like trauma-informed pedagogy going forward, recognizing that the world has been through a trauma. A lot of people have lost some loved ones, or they have had COVID themselves, and the situation with the physical distancing and the lockdown has had economic and mental health impacts on a lot of people. And moving forward, even as the pandemic situation hopefully improves, these things will continue to have impacts on our students and on our teachers. And we need to come at it all with both an equity mindset, a care mindset, and to use our creativity and imagination. And I want to share with you one thing before I go, which is the series of community building resources that we built. It's about how can you help people build community online. And so it's got demo videos. I'm putting it in the chat in the room where everyone else is. And I'm going to put it here in Zoom as well for people with me in the room. And it's just educators from all over the world coming together to share how can we build community online. And then also, how do you adapt this if you can't have a synchronous session? How do you adapt it if you don't have Zoom? How do you adapt it if you don't have breakout rooms? How do you adapt it for different cultures? So we would have an educator from Kenya, an educator from the US, and me, and then someone from South Africa would write a note, oh, this is not applicable to South Africa because of this reason. And so one of the things about working globally and supporting each other and making these things available for free for others online is that we're all learning with each other. We were all sort of in a similar situation, but then our home context is still different. And so this website has a lot of ideas for building community online, and then their adaptations for different cultures. So thank you. I'm going to stop here, and looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Maha. That was enlightening. We're running short on time, but I think we can take a quick couple of questions that we have. So I'll probably put across the question that we have specifically for Dr. Ivy. So this is from Mr. Frank from Uganda. So what he wants to know is that during the pandemic now, the world had to be reactive, and the widespread of online education was more of an emergency response. So as a proactive approach now, what are the best teaching methods that the teachers should adopt to foster online learning so that it's not boring for the learners and something that will foster long attention on the part of the learner? Dr. Ivy, the question is for you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Thanks for that interesting question. My suggestion would be we need to create more interaction opportunities in learning so that the learning will not be more boring, and we could get the involvement of students, the active participation of the students in the learning. Thank you. I hope it helps.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ivy. Okay, so before the pandemic, the focus of many educational institutes was on traditional academic skills and rote learning. So Dr. Maha, this question is for you. So do you think that the pandemic was an inflection point for not just rapid technical innovation, but also an increased focus on skills such as critical thinking and adaptability?
So first of all, I hope so, but I think we have to be really realistic about what actually happened during the pandemic. And that is that some people managed to teach online okay, and some people didn't. And some people did start to have a better imagination, start to realize, oh, I don't want my exams to, for example, test for memorization, because people can search things up on the internet. They always could, but when they were learning online, it was more obvious. But there's also a lot of people who didn't make those shifts. And there's also a lot of hope that we are moving forward and we have a new normal, but there's a lot of people who still want to go back. So I think this would say, I would hope so, but it's not necessarily going to happen. And a lot of the emergency remote teaching was not good quality. The students were not in a good mindset, and the teachers were not in a good mindset. So I think we need to rethink a lot of things as we go forward. And it's not necessarily going to be built on a very solid foundation, because the pandemic remote teaching for a lot of people was just a very shaky foundation and was not a great experience. But I hope that going forward we do this, but I don't think it's going to happen if we don't put in a lot of effort to make it happen.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we've seen that in the initial phases, digital education was considered to be a supplement to traditional teaching. Now, however, before the pandemic, it had started to, stand on its own. So my next question is for Dr. Clarice. So do you think the digital transformation was catapulted to the next level sooner than it would otherwise have?
I do think so. We've seen in our institution specifically that there was some lecturers integrating technology and making use of it, and really realizing the value that it can add in teaching and learning experiences, both in class and outside of class. But I think what the pandemic did was to force people who were reluctant, because they were accustomed to what they know and what they are comfortable with, to really provide an experience to students that they can relate to. So I do think it has. I think the question remains whether they will continue to use it if we do go back to campus, and what the effect of the pandemic and what they have done with technology during the pandemic, if it really influenced them to carry on with it. And I think that's where we will really be able to answer that question, is once we go back to see if we are in a hybrid situation, are there certain aspects that they will still use or explore even further, or will they just revert back to what they knew before the pandemic?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Clarice. I think we're running short on time. I would have wanted this conversation to go on and on. It's a very interesting conversation, but maybe some other time. So while we've seen that change is inevitable and future is uncertain, so however, we can, I think, use the past experiences and the present conditions and human power of imagination and innovation to take the gift of education to the masses, as many people as possible. With this, I would like to bring this session to an end. Thank you everyone for joining us today. You can all now move to the breakout rooms. We have 3 rooms open simultaneously: the student voice, academic leaders, and conversation. So see you all there. Bye.